Sorry, Michael. Just take it. Dude, Jamie edits that out. I'm Chris Niemeyer. Ready to talk about being dads, being husbands, and being business leaders. You got Jamie Slingerland, Michael McGreevy, and Chris McCluskey. This is part 2 of teaching your kids entrepreneurship, teaching them to grow in this world they already live in. And if you remember the last episode, we focused a bit more on money and teaching them the value of that and focused on their personal development and sharing the daily living that we do and how that applies to being entrepreneurs who work from home and get to share more experience with them. And in this episode, we want to just dive into really talking about the soft skills of entrepreneurship and of business and of being a man that can grow whatever enterprise it is and hoping that our kids catch that as well. And so we just want to dive in here on this idea of EQ versus IQ and teaching them the value of those skills they're not going to learn from a workbook, but is so much more valuable to their life, to their career, to their ability to make their own dreams come true, as it were. And so today, guys, go ahead. What do we have in store for?
No, I just wanted to stop you there for a second, Chris, because soft skills, like what if somebody doesn't know what that means? Like what are soft skills and hard skills? Can we define that as a starting point?
Reading, writing, arithmetic, book work. That's kind of IQ-driven hard skills that pretty much any kind of kid can learn, whether they're in the government school system, the private school system, homeschooled, whatever. They're going to learn those things. And that's the level playing field that all of our kids will have. But soft skills, let's talk about those. Is it character, integrity, being a man of your word, being relational, having intuition? I mean, all those things that it's not a workbook type of thing that you can teach a kid. It's, again, they're going to catch this from how we're acting and how we're interacting with people. But I mean, what do you think, Jamie? What's another soft skill you throw out there?
I was thinking about on that episode where we talked about homeschool, Mayor Gunner going into the bagel shop, shaking people's hands and saying, "How are you? I hope you're having a good day. Nice to see you." When kids learn these skills and how to relate, then it changes who they are and the opportunities they have. And then McCluskey shared about how when we put kids with everybody their same age, now they're relating to only 12-year-olds, and they're only learning how 12-year-olds relate. But when you take a kid that's 12 and they're hanging out with a senior citizen and they're helping out with a baby and they're talking to different age levels, it's like they're learning how to adapt and adjust. And you can't give them a manual and have them learn those. They have to learn by experience, by doing, by getting feedback, by offending somebody or making somebody happy with something they said. And that's the tendency in our culture, well, if my kid is the best at math, then he's going to have more opportunities. But it brings up the homeschool thing again. Like, what are we teaching our kids? Like, how can we make our kids really successful business leaders? And that, I think it boils down to teaching them the soft skills so that people want to be around them. If everybody wants to be around our kids when they're 30 years old, they're going to have so many opportunities.
Yeah, in a word, it's character, right? And we're working on their individual character. And when somebody's got a quality character, they've got great relationship skills. They've got good interactive abilities because their character just kind of oozes out of they walk into a room and people just want to be in conversation or relationship with that person because they're a person of solid character. I'm going to give an illustration here of a time when conversations that we had with our kids morphed into an experience I was having with my son Colin when he was 5 years old. We had started a little snack food delivery route. This was a supplemental kind of a side hustle thing that we were doing only on Fridays. It was totally brainless. I could just go out to mom and pop shops, little cafes and gas stations and stuff in about a 30-mile radius here of where we live. And I was bringing them racks of snack foods. So like high quality nuts, honey roasted things and beef jerkies and licorices, good quality licorices, that kind of stuff. was a private label kind of a thing. We would bring in the rack, and we wanted them to set it up where their customers would see it, maybe at the checkout, as they're paying for whatever they bought. And then we would just go each week and inventory what had sold and restock that, and then charge the customer for however much of their stuff they had actually made money on. It was a really, really simple, basic, stripped down business model. But I called it Daddy's Snacks, because the idea was, not only are we going to bring in some money as a family here, we need to pick up about $500 a month. So I figured this can easily do that. I'm going to bring Colin with me. So this is my Friday time with Colin. We would jump in the car. We would get all the boxes that UPS had delivered of the snacks that we had ordered the previous week, to restock. We'd go around and we started talking about his soft skills, about his ability to look people in the eye, give them a firm handshake, give them an explanation of what we had to offer, ask them if they would be willing to put our rack in their store to sell our good quality snacks to people. So we would practice that together. Now you got to picture this little 5-year-old boy with his little baseball cap on. He kind of talked like he had marbles in his mouth at the time. So he's got that cute little kid sound to his voice, little squeaky boy voice. And he comes in and he would have a little fistful of these tube nuts. They were packaged in long tubes. And he would hold them out to whoever the person was, look them in the eyes, and ask them, would you put our Daddy's Snacks in your store? And when we walked out, customer after customer after customer, and we hardly ever got a no, because a cute little boy is giving them an opportunity to make some money, and he's interacting with them like he was a more grown-up kind of a kid. And sure enough, we could walk out and Colin would realize, I got another client. We got another customer for ourselves, and he would go in the next week and rotate. That's teaching those soft skills with the immediate reward. Ooh, that made money for our family.
That's a great story. I love that example.
Yeah.
I got hungry, Chris, hearing about the liquor.
Me too.
Got any Daddy's Snacks you can share with us over there? Yeah, man.
Oh, man.
Isn't it so upside down, though, that what traditional education teaches? How you got to get these hard skills down, your reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever it might be. And then if you have time or if the right situation arises, then you can teach on character. Or we'll take you to church on Sunday and then you can learn about character. Just hearing you guys talk about this, I mean, it seems like they're almost more important in some instances than the hard skills. And I know in business, nobody ever has done business with me that did not want to talk with me or did not enjoy something about interacting with me. And so anytime you win a deal in your own business, whether that be in construction, coaching, whatever service you offer, if you don't have some of those soft skills to build trust, to do what you say you're going to do, to be a man of your word, wow, your business is going to be in a hard spot. And I think about that with Gunnar too, and he's 3 years old, and he picks this stuff up. One of the things we want people to feel when they walk into our home is that they're welcomed, and we're paying attention to them, and we see them, and we want them to like us. We teach Gunnar that every time somebody comes in the door, he runs up to the door, shakes their hand, asks them how they're doing, invites them in, and on their way out, the same thing. Remember, buddy, we got to walk our guests to the door. He runs to the door, opens it up for them, says, thanks for coming, and hope you have a nice day. And some of those basics, man, they just make people feel so good. I remember a very specific story. When I went into this law firm, I used to sell printing services to law firms. And the head partner of this law firm greeted me at the elevator, shook my hand, welcomed me into his office, and made me feel like I was a rock star or something. And at the end, walked me all the way through his office and back onto the elevator and told me to have a nice day. And I remember that so clearly this day. And that guy was like, wow, he is a professional. He cares about people. I really just like that person, and I would do business with him if I could. And so we learn these lessons, and we pass them down to our kids, and it positions them well to be successful in business, I think.
Absolutely. Those are great examples. And yeah, I go back to the story that Jamie shared on a different podcast, the episode of ours where Gunnar was going into the bagel and donut shop, and Mr. Mayor, 3 years old, shaking people's hand, going up to each of these guys. I mean, he's learned that because you have modeled that in your home, and then he can translate that into appropriate places outside the home. And again, he's someone who, I'll bet all those people in the shop owners, like, I want that kid to come back because I had fun around him. Just like he can use those skills and grow into them and be different than any other attorney firm that you just mentioned that would greet him at the elevator, walk him up. I mean, just really truly be a guest. And that's how they're going to start learning. They just get to start practicing now at this early age and get better and better at this intuition. And I like your example too of just contrasting. The hard skills is the reading, writing, arithmetic, and what maybe teachers think some of the soft skills are, sit down, shut up, raise your hand when you're called on, like just wait for that kind of stuff. That's not good soft skills. I mean, we're teaching them the value of these relational and working with intuition. Jamie, you feel like you have something to share there. What was on your tongue?
Gosh. I'm like a volcano that's about to erupt.
Uh-oh.
Look out.
It was Giovanni's birthday yesterday. He's the 4th of July baby. And my kids were singing happy birthday to Giovanni in Spanish and then like doing this other thing. Like I forgot what they were saying, like blow out the candles or like something they learned in Mexico that I'd never even heard. Kids are like little sponges. Like we learned this when I studied as a language teacher they talked about the little black box in your brain. And anybody who tries to learn a language when you're 40 years old, like we just went to France. It's doable to learn a language when you're 40 years old, but it is hard. Like Colin, he can learn those emotional intelligence, those skills by being 5 years old, going in, learning how to shake somebody's hand. He'll have that his whole life. Those skills are going deep into who he is and who he is becoming. It is such an opportunity for us to have them lean into some pain, knock on some doors, to take risk as young adults and learn how to deal with different age groups. So, I mean, I get super excited thinking about my kids going to Mexico and learning Spanish. And I remember me and Ruthie, when we first got married, we were like, we're going to make our kids be bilingual. We're going to speak to them in the home and force it. And now we just see ourselves backing up and letting our kids learn it on their own with optimism, and they're excited about taking risks. I mean, they're not completely amazing in Spanish, but they love learning because it's just natural, right? They're learning how to do things in a natural context. And so for me, like that's how it's the best kind of learning, that we want to invite our children into learning these soft skills where we're not beating them into submission or having them make a fool of themselves in the boardroom when they're 45 years old and embarrass themselves. Let's have them be embarrassed at 5 years old selling snack products at the gas station and have the guy give them an attitude at 5 years old. And then dad can just explain, like, why put our kids in these spots when they're 50 years old where they're getting hurt so badly when they can learn this at 5 and 6 years old?
Jamie, you hit the phrase, in my opinion, when you said help them to love learning. There's not a kid born who doesn't naturally want to learn. I mean, they constantly are asking, why this? And they're experimenting with things. They're learning all the time. It's built into us to want to learn. What happens is that we adults oftentimes quash that love of learning by trying to teach them in ways that we didn't like either. Those very, directive kind of sit still, read this, report that, what's the correct answer, go to the board and work the problem. And yet we can oftentimes operate on like autopilot, thinking, well, I guess it's my turn to be the one who makes them sit down and do the homework the right way at the right time for as long as it takes till it's done. And yeah, suddenly, surprise, surprise, they don't love learning anymore. No, they're not loving the way we're teaching. But when you give these kind of life experiences, you were saying, about Colin, but, as he gets older, he's going to have those skills from 5. I'll tell you what, I can see in my mind's eye when he was 13. And I was at a world conference hosting a booth for one of my other businesses. And there was 7,000 people at this conference, a huge resort. And Colin is in his little suit at 13 years old. I mean, say little, but I mean, like, think here, right at the cusp of adolescence, right? Voice is still cracking and all. We know what it's like to be a 13-year-old boy. He's there in his suit looking very much like a miniature version of me, staffing that booth with me, interacting with professionals This is because of my clinical background. This is, master's degree and PhD type people that he's interacting with, looking them in the eye, shaking their hands, giving them brochures and information, and answering questions about the services that we had to offer. I cannot tell you how many emails and personal notes, even cards in the mail, that I got for years after that from people saying, I first met you at that conference. One of your kids was their staff, and they would tell me the story of their interaction with Colin, because he was there knowing that he could just be friendly and real and interact like any other business person would do. Yeah, there wasn't that shame or that embarrassment or awkwardness. He was doing what dad does, and he loves it.
Yeah, and he caught that from you. And, fast forward a few years later, I just got to see and experience the joy of your kids all coming on this cruise we went on last year together.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So, we're on this cruise. You bring your whole family, the whole crew comes, and it's this cruise with Dan Miller, the 48 Days folks. And so there's about 80 entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, podcasters, and your kids were involved each day. And every night they're getting dressed up and going down to the dining hall, and we're kind of seating round robin where they're getting to just dive into great adult, conversations and learn from them. And it was so natural because you took those opportunities, like when Colin was 13, to expose them. This is what life is. This is what life is like. And
absolutely,
it's natural.
Even that booth that we were hosting there a few years later, we're talking those big, beautiful scrims, that you can like 10 feet by 6 feet or whatever. The graphics on them are fantastic. Drew was doing those for us, designing the graphics for our primary promotion at like $10,000 booth space. The graphic was done by our 15, 16-year-old son. And people were asking, who does your graphics? He started building his business from the stuff that he was doing in graphic design, piddling around with software here, but he was having adults see it. He was having it put out there in the marketplace. He was getting orders. Just as long as you give them opportunity, you give them support and encouragement, they get those experiences, they catch the bug. They want to learn it. They get so fired up. And boy, once money starts coming through, they're hooked. Who wouldn't be, right?
Oh, man. I'm hearing this statement roll around in my head of, I'm going to throw a wrench in things right now, and I want you guys to spit back at me. But I hear this line of, let kids be kids. Like, stop trying to force them into adulthood too soon. Have you ever heard that? I feel like I hear that all the time. Just they're kids. Let them play. Let them do mindless stuff. Like, let them. Yeah. What do you guys think about that?
Definitely affirm, Michael, that there is a concern that we make sure as parents that we do let our kids be kids in the sense of enjoying life and having fun and knowing that everything isn't about working hard. What we're talking about here is, I think, the joy of entrepreneurism. So we want them to catch that bug, but it's not to the exclusion of the other. Our kids have had every kind of adventure imaginable. It's just that as they're having it, part of what they're doing is recognizing this is why we work, so we can have these adventures. This is why we learn these skills, so we can explode things financially and have more adventures still. So it's not an either or approach. Absolutely. If a parent starts to hear that you want to start training your kids as if you want them to be a virtuoso violinist, when they're 3 years old and they're going to spend 8 hours a day practicing or something, that would not be at all the message we're sending here about entrepreneurism. It's instead a lifestyle approach, a way of thinking about self and life and the marketplace and all kinds of things that we as parents adopt intentionally to shape our kids in a way so that they are not going to have this massive typical thing of Western adolescence where kids are still being kids and they're in this kind of perpetual kid state and they're into their 20s and they're kind of still a 24-year-old adolescent. Like, when the heck are they going to grow up? It wasn't. There's not a switch that we throw when we finally get out of the real world, and there's not a switch that's to be left off with regard to business when they're kids. An integrative approach across the lifespan, I think, looks for balance in all things. Temperance, is a key word. Know what you value and be sure all of those values are being represented in your parenting.
I am so on board with that. You have no idea. It reminds me of Andy Andrews and what he says about raising kids. so many adults raise their kids to be great kids. And he says, raise them to be extraordinary adults, and that'll change the way that you raise your kids. And I think it kind of speaks to what we're talking about here, having a vision for what you want to do as a parent, how you want to raise your kids, what do you want them to know over time. And you start to look through that lens of everyday situations. All right, well, what does Gunnar need to know in this situation so he becomes a great adult? That's really given me a lot of guidance in how I've raised my kids so far.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right in terms of the vision you want to have for your kids, raising these kids to be great adults. We talked earlier about, as an example, at a young age, and I don't know where we picked this up from, but it was probably some other, great parent of role model, but we just said, we don't want to do this baby talk forever with these, babies and toddlers. Like, just start speaking regular to these kids. And it's been remarkable to see how even at a really young age, and other families or adults that would interact with a little 2-year-old were like, wow, they are talking really well for 2. And you have some kids or parents that have a 3.5-year-old that's still kind of muttering baby talk. And yet some of our kids are just fine carrying a little sentence or 2 conversation at that young age. It's like, well, we don't want them to talk baby talk when they're teenagers, so we're just going to start talking to them now, and they'll get the vocabulary, as they learn.
Oh, but it's so cute. We don't want them to move on from that too quickly. I don't want to lose these memories. It's shocking to me, Chris, when Gunnar starts a conversation with an adult, they're blown away that he can have like a regular conversation. And that's like crazy to me. Why wouldn't kids learn how to have a regular conversation? I mean, why hold them back intentionally? That seems completely crazy to me.
I'm just laughing here with Michael. If we can hold them back, they'll still be in our basement and be able to be around us when they're 25 and 30 and not help them learn these skills. Maybe they won't have the confidence to go out there and have success. We'll have somebody that can take the garbage out and make us coffee and stuff like that when they're in their early and mid 20s.
Good luck getting them to get off the couch to make you coffee and take the garbage out if you don't do basic things.
You see these parents just like bailing their kids out of everything.
So what's your vision for your kids? Is it for them to never leave you? Sleep on your couch forever? Don't do what we're talking about.
Man, I'll tell you what, I'm flashing on a picture of one of our recent world trips. We've taken the kids to an awful lot of places in the world as part of the homeschooling, the flexible lifestyle that we have because of entrepreneurism. But I'm thinking as we drove through much of the countryside in Italy and in France, in even Ireland, but particularly in England, out in the Cotswolds and all, we would frequently, as we were driving along these country kinds of routes, you would see up on hilltops that there were old structures, many of them castles, many of them still lived in, others, in dilapidated states. But what we would talk about often in the car on those trips was about the people who built those houses. I mean, if that's a house, we look at it and we say that's a castle. Yeah, but every man's house is his castle, right? So those are big houses that we call castles. Who was that person? Why were they able to do that? And of course, the answer is those were the landowners. Those were the business persons. We call them aristocracy or we call them royalty, but what they were in the Middle Ages and coming out of the Dark Ages were the people who were proactive enough in looking at what was going to be needed to keep people alive, keep them defended, keep them fed, establish some kind of a stability of an economy or a town or whatever, that they organized and coordinated things. That's how they got in those positions. And the people in the area then became servants for them because they were provided protection. And they had somebody to help them figure out how to manage the land and drain the swamps and irrigate and whatever things were needed to get them through. Those were the entrepreneurs of a previous generation. And the conversations we were having with the kids right there in real life as we're out having a wonderful adventure vacation is shaping in them now a worldview, a mindset about self. What does it look like in 21st century to be a landowner? a person who, now you don't have servants, we call them employees, but they're people who work for you and they choose to work for you. Why? Because you've caught a vision, you've operationalized it, you've taught how other people can do it, you've got systems for things. You're shaping in your kids as you go about life an entrepreneurial mindset, and it develops their view of self and their place in the world. You're not creating an arrogance that says, oh, we're going to be kings and queens. Isn't that wonderful? You're saying, how do you have that kind of influence? How do you help shape your culture? You have the means of production. You take initiative. You do things that other people are scared to do, don't think they can do, don't know how to do. You risk, you learn, you grow, and that's how you influence culture as an entrepreneur.
That's really, really good. That's so true in terms of what we're wanting to teach along the way. Again, like that example, you're driving, you're pointing things out from centuries ago that you can apply to now, to their real world as you're helping shape their worldview. You're exposing them. Again, you're still letting the kids be kids, but you're seeing an opportunity and you're seizing on that opportunity to share a real life example. And they're getting it, they're internalizing it into how that's going to affect them and their own career and enterprise. So yeah, I love that, Chris. That's a great example. So as we land the plane here and finish out this second of 2 episodes on teaching your kids the value of entrepreneurship and just the value of living in this world, remember, what can you do to really hone in on their emotional intelligence, this EQ versus IQ? What are some practical things you could be teaching them, instructing them, modeling for them even now to catch and to bring on to their own personhood? And then number 2, what is your vision for your kids? Really thinking through, how do you want your kids to develop, not just as kids being kids and being a great kid, but being a person, individual, a man or woman of character that others want to be around. And to use Chris's latest example there, to work for maybe eventually. I mean, those are the kind of people that we want to raise up in our homes.
Thank you for listening to the Entrepreneurial Family Man Podcast. Visit efmlife.com to connect with us and others like you who are pursuing success in enterprise, family, and marriage.